Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, what I think the biggest issue with DBD's lore and storytelling is right now, and what I would do to fix it. I don't intend to beat around the bush. Dead by Daylight storytelling is in kind of a rough spot right now. And let me be clear, I don't think it has much to do with the stories themselves. They do bear some amount of the blame here, but I believe, at least personally, that DBD is actually on kind of a hot streak with its storytelling, and hasn't had a bad story in a hot minute. Aside from the Pig and Jonah tomes, and maybe Vittorio, I'd say DBD Lore this year has actually been one of the best we've ever had. The problem we have right now isn't the stories, it's just that nobody reads them. As someone whose livelihood depends on DBD Lore being at least interesting, this is quite a worrying trend. I'm noticing in comments and Twitter replies more and more that people don't seem to be reading the stories anymore. If anything, they're just waiting for my videos to come out on them. This is flattering, no doubt about it, but it's also very, very worrying. I also know I'm not the only person covering DBD Lore to some extent. I know Mint, Skull and Asimov's both also have talked about it before and continue to do so. However, what if you're a brand new player who doesn't know about these YouTubers? What if you just don't like us? It should not be the job of myself and others like me to present behaviour stories for them because their own community doesn't want to go looking for them for themselves. Behaviours lore has a really bad accessibility issue. And I don't mean like disabled accessibility like you normally define accessibility in a game. I mean accessibility as in the ability for players just going through the natural process of playing the game to stumble upon and understand it and want to see more of it. Dead by Daylight is a game that has some great stories and some fantastic characters. But let's take a quick look as to how the game that they're framed in kind of does them a disservice, and how behaviour could go about fixing that. The biggest issue that I've noticed is how unattractive it is to actually read the stories in the game itself. I'm going to take you on a little tour to show you what exactly I mean. Okay, so say you've just opened up the game and you want to read the story of your favourite character. So let's try and pick a character who everyone loves, everyone's favourite character. Let's go and choose the survivor, Jonah Vasquez. Let's pick. Let's try to see want to read the lore of our favourite man, Jonah. So what you want to do is you want to look at his base story. You press F1 to see character details. Note, by the way, the prompt F1 to show character details isn't actually on the main screen. They got rid of that. When they got rid of that, so there's no way to know that you press F1 to look at the character's perks and backstory. And the backstory is this little column here, the white text and dark background, and because backgrounds are quite long these days, you just scroll, and scroll, and scroll, and scroll, and yeah, you have to scroll a lot. You're fed these tiny little sections one at a time, in this really awkward format, where you have to scroll for 900 years to get to the end of your story. And this has become a bigger problem the longer these stories have gotten. So you have to follow a command that isn't actually on the screen, like I can't see anywhere where it says F1 to look at your character's details, and then scroll for about 400,000 years to read the story one bit at a time. And say, okay, I'm going to now look at his tome story. So what you do is you don't find it on the character page, you go to the archives, and then you can either back out and use the archives from the main menu, or you use the challenge bar at the side to click on the archives. You press compendium to look at all the tomes, and then you just have to know which tome the Jonah story is in. How you know that? The game doesn't fucking tell you. You find a tome. I haven't noticed tome 12. And then you press collection. And then you press the right story, and it's in all these little increments.
Crowd the rainy streets of White Rock, Colorado. A couple exits a grocery.
So you have to go through menu, archives, compendium, find the right tome, and then find the story, and then you get it in 10 chunks that cover up maybe a quarter of the screen, and you have to scroll through them like you do with the last one. And only once you get to the end do you get access to the cinematic. And that's on top of actually unlocking those stories. It's such an ungodly faff. There is so much that you have to do to navigate through the menus to find these stories. No one's going to stumble across these. No one's just going to find it. Unless you're actively looking for it and you know where to look, you're never going to find these things. They are squirreled away in menus after menus and through massive pages you have to scroll through just to get to the stories. Can you see what I mean yet? Accessing DBD lore in the actual game of DBD itself is such a fucking hassle, and it doesn't need to be. Accessing DBD lore, especially the tomes in the game, is a faff, which is why no one I know actually does it. DBD's lore being squirreled away behind the battle pass or behind 400,000 mouse scrolls means that players who aren't explicitly looking for it will not find it and will not read it. And even players who do want to read it often aren't going to read it in the game itself, they'll just go on the wiki. I've been making videos for over 2 years, and almost every time I've used a quote from the game in that time, I just screenshotted it from the wiki instead of using it from the game, because the wiki is so much easier to work with if you're looking to get information like that. Again, stuff created by fans, by members of the community, kind of picking up behaviour slack by making the lore easily accessible. New players, casual players, aren't going to go on the wiki to find these things out. They won't even know it exists. If it's not in the game, then they don't really care. The base lore being such a mess to read, I think it's understandable, because the system worked very, very well for older stories that were much shorter. But ever since, I'm going to say about Jane, stories, especially for survivors, have gotten substantially longer. We have to recognise that the old UI system that worked well for older stories is no longer fit for purpose. And I'd argue that the UI for the tomes, at least for the tome stories, has never been suitable to easily navigate. And not to mention, once you find the story, which itself can be a challenge, you either then have to scroll even more, or just sit there listening to it. In theory, adding an audiobook version of the tome stories is an excellent idea. It makes them more accessible to people who have reading difficulties or have issues with their sight. On paper, I love it. But in practice, it's kind of self-defeating. Allow me to demonstrate. Obviously, not having to read it does help, but let's just press play on this story here, just to hear the narration.
Pedestrians crowd the rainy
Cool.
streets
Okay.
of White Rock,
Because it's
Colorado.
being read to me, I don't need to read it,
couple
so I'll just go
exits
back
of
into
grocery
the menu, and it stops. So it reads out the story to you. Go back into Compendia. It reads the story out to you.
Opens his eyes in a daze.
But you have to leave it on the reading page. It kind of defeats the point, at least to some degree, of having an audio narration system in the first place. Because you can't do anything else while this is playing. You have to just sit there and just listen to it. You can't go and spend your blood points. You can't go and queue for a match. You can't go and redeem your rift challenges. You can't even read another story or like change your skins or go into the shop. You just have to sit there and listen to it. That is all you can do. You wonder why no one consumes these stories. These UI features, both for the base lore and the tome, are horribly outdated. And I guarantee the only reason they haven't been changed in all this time is because no one uses them enough to complain about them. But I'm going to be fair and honest here. I don't think changing the UI to make DBD lore more accessible is the only thing behaviour can do to improve the ability for players to pick up on and enjoy the game's lore. The stories themselves, at least the kind of stories behaviour's been telling recently, have to shoulder some portion of the blame. I'll reiterate, I don't think the stories you've been getting recently are bad. But in a lot of cases, there's more and more emphasis, especially when it comes to bringing new characters in, on these big concepts like DBD's multiverse and deja vuism and all that sort of stuff that requires you to be heavily invested in the story already in order to properly understand it. This makes DBD lore extra accessible for newcomers who aren't ready to do all that background reading just to understand the basics of a story. It's why I'm actually a fan of Michaela's tome and the way it's written. It handles these concepts in a very approachable way, but that's kind of the exception rather than the rule. The Blight and Jonah tome and Hattie and Vittorio's base lore, I think all kind of fall foul of this. And it's okay to tell stories like these, it really, really is, but for that to be the majority of your original content output in any given year is not a good look if you're trying to get new players invested in the stories that this game has to offer. And let's not forget that between the inaccessible menus and the indecipherable stories, let's not forget the secret third thing that, for all I know, is actually the most significant reason no one cares about DBD lore, but is also by far the hardest to solve. And that is the isolation between the lore and the gameplay. A lot of players just play this game for something to play, and while they're perfectly within their rights to do that, it does make me kind of sad that they're missing out on some genuinely excellent storytelling and some really charming characters. In terms of how best to fix this and integrate the game's lore and gameplay a little bit more closely, I'll be getting onto that when I talk about solutions. Which seems like a pretty good segue to talk about solutions. The problem that has the cleanest solution is all the UI menu stuff, making it easier for players to consume the story content that's already there in the game. I suggest that on the character information page when you pick a survivor or a killer, it shows you not just their full base lore, but direct links to their tome stories in any tomes they might appear in, with all the stories available in written and audio form from that character information screen. If you choose to start the audio playing and then leave the menu, the audio should keep playing while you're spending blood points or in queue, but not when you're in a lobby. Basically, you should be able to leave it on in the background and then do something else. The written form of the story should be presented with wide horizontal boxes, not short vertical ones, to minimise the need to keep scrolling to keep accessing the information. The more you have to scroll, the more people are just going to say fuck it and not bother, or just go on the wiki. And this is a very minor thing, but I'm sure it would go appreciated for a lot of players, unless you're a very new player still learning the game's mechanics, or you're playing as a brand new character. The loading screen tips should just be replaced with little lore facts about the character that you're playing, or about the entity's realm in general. It doesn't need to be anything massive, it could just be little things like the name of Jeff's dog or the hillbilly's favourite television programme. Players with 7,000 hours in the game don't need to be told that dropping a pallet stuns the killer. While the solutions to the lore accessibility and UI issues are fairly obvious, even if the technical fixes might be harder than they appear, it's a lot less clear what needs to be done about the other elements that are causing alienation from DBD's story content. I think part of the issue right now is that DBD's multiverse stuff and the Black Veil entity cult are two constantly recurring story elements that have been going on non-stop for the past couple of years, but they haven't really made much of an impact. They're just present enough to potentially alienate people who might be interested in the stories but aren't fully up to date on all this Black Veil multiverse deja vuism bullshit, but they're not present enough to be a good payoff for all this background machinations and build-up. Imagine for a second that the Blight wasn't a character in DBD, that they just kept making Blight stories for the past 4 years every single quarter without ever paying any of them off. That's kind of where we are right now. We either need to go completely ham on an entirely Black Veil focused story for a full chapter, like say a dedicated Black Veil killer, and maybe a survivor they tried to sacrifice but escaped or something, or they just need to take a step back for a while and focus more on these smaller scale, personal stories, and just give the Black Veil a rest for a while. For want of a better term, shit or get off the toilet. Either pay off these Black Veil stories, these multiverse stories that have been going on for so long, or leave them be and introduce new exciting concepts in their place that are more attractive to newcomers who can't keep up with every story release. The last issue that we face, the poor integration between DBD's lore and gameplay, is by far the hardest to fix, because it requires a lot more innovation and tweaks to just the way that the game works on a fundamental level. This is why I'm a huge fan of Evil Dead's single player mission system, and if DBD introduced a similar system, perhaps using the AI survivors and later killers that they are working on as part of their custom game system, that would be an immensely popular new feature to add to the game. Imagine a chapter release where a new survivor and killer come out and you have to navigate the new map or find an item or rescue someone while being hunted by this AI controlled killer, with story specific rewards like cosmetics or whatever for completing this little mission. It'd be an interesting innovation using the game's increased usage of AI to create a single player experience that would promote cohesion between the lore and gameplay of Dead by Daylight. Doubtless this would take a lot of development time, a lot of money, a lot of effort. I don't believe it would ever really happen, but I can think of no better way to get people to really care about the lore of this game. DBD is a game that's fallen into the trap that a lot of live service games have fallen into, where it becomes very hard to care about stories because they're always adding bits on and tweaking it to support the game's release model, but that often comes at the cost of poor integration between gameplay and lore. I have always believed there are better ways to communicate this game's story and characters to its players than the kind of antiquated tome system that's got thrown onto the battle pass one time. DBD players, and even its characters, which remain one of the game's biggest selling points, deserve better than the tome system, at least in its current form. Why do you think I applied for that narrative design job at Behaviour? Because I care a lot about this game's stories, and I'm tired of both Behaviour and the game's player base sleeping on it. And to finish off today, I want to show you something that I think is really impressive. Something that demonstrates what a game studio that's confident in their own IP can do when they take live service storytelling seriously. This book, Realms of Runeterra, was written by the people who make League of Legends, Riot Games, and it's effectively League's giant book of lore. It contains a ton of stories, details on characters, regions, using the story that was already written for them, using stuff that was taken from design stages, and it was published in 2019, which is the same year that Arcane got announced for Netflix. Arcane is a phenomenal show. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you do it. And it really does show what a company who's willing to take their storytelling seriously can make out of a game that isn't really designed to do that. Obviously, Behaviour is nowhere near the size of Riot, nowhere near the influence and money of Riot, but I hope one day we get our own Arcane, we get our own Realms of Runeterra. I just wish that love that I have for this game and its characters was truly shared by Behaviour, and they're able to wear this game's story and characters proudly on its sleeve. Getting people to care about this stuff is not impossible, far from it. It just needs a bit more effort and a bit more understanding of what it is that players want that in 6 years we've just never seen. I know that there are a few people at Behaviour who do watch my videos, and whoever you are, no matter what you do, I thank you for your hard work. I don't know if anything is being worked on right now to make the lore of this game something a bit more enticing to new players, but if not, I fervently believe it should be. And whether the solutions to those problems would necessarily be my solutions or other ones entirely, I don't know. I just hope that the problem can be identified and maybe work towards a solution can begin. Well, that's everything I have to say about Dead by Daylight's biggest lore problem. Do you think I'm identifying it right? Do you think I'm identifying good solutions? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments, and while you're down there, feel free to subscribe if you're new to the channel. In the description you can see links to all my socials, in my Twitch where I stream every so often, and my Patreon. Patrons get to see my videos a day early, so if you want to be part of Early Access Gang, and throw the channel some support, by all means the link is down there. With Christmas on the way, I'll be visiting family next week, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to be getting another video out before I go. And it's another entry in the Potential and Problems series, which is always a fun time. As to what franchise it is, well, I guess I'll see when it comes out, although anyone who follows on Twitter will probably already know about it. In any case, I guess I'll see you then. Ta-ta for now.